right, welcome into the first episode of Hail to the Podcast, brought to you by Maize and Blue Review on the Rivals Network. Two hosts here. We got the ace, Josh Henschke, publisher of Maize and Blue Review, on your right-hand side, and then I am Brandon Justice, senior editor of Maize and Blue on the left hand. And if you're listening, then our directions don't matter. Here we are. It's Thursday, and the season is near. I mean, we are 2 days away. We've been talking about it the same way we talk about it every year, where it seems like it's going to take forever. And then June comes, you blink, and it's September 1st, and summer flies by. But all is well because football, right? So on this show, you'll hear from Josh and I. If you haven't heard, we have plenty of podcasts going on here at Maize and Blue Review. Each day is covered with a show. Most days we'll have multiple. We've got post-game shows, pre-game shows, you name it, got it covered. As far as Hail to the Podcast, what you can expect from HTTP is just an insider intel perspective from Josh and I, mainly Josh for now, from Josh and I. And then we'll also dive deep into X's and O's as well with what to expect from Michigan's opponents since we're so near game day when we record this compared to the other shows. And we'll just take an all-out look at what to expect from the team going forward with an intel insider-centric approach. We'll start doing mailbags as the show establishes itself and hear from the audience and answer your guys' questions as the show goes on. But fully expect this show to outlast just football season, given we've got basketball right after that and so many sports in between. So that is what to expect from Hail to the Podcast. But I've been talking for too long. Let's hear from Josh. Josh, how are you? How are you feeling about football season?
Yeah, no, I feel pretty good about it. You know, I'm ready to kind of see some, actual tangible stuff that we can talk about, rather than just, these guesses and what ifs and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it's here. We're ready. I feel good about the team. I mean, it's hard not to feel good about the team. I mean, yeah, they have question marks, but I don't think those question marks are areas of concern where it might change the trajectory of the season. I think they're very minute, I guess, issues in a sense. I mean, they're only issues until you can actually figure out what they have on the field. So, I mean, again, it's it's good when we actually have actual football to talk about, so we can actually determine whether, okay, maybe it's not as bad as we thought it would be, or okay, it's worse than we thought it would be. So, yeah, I mean, at face value, I mean, Michigan has a couple of problem areas, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. And there's only one way to figure that out of what this team is going to look like when they start playing games, which starts on Saturday against Colorado State. So personally, I don't know if you'll be able to find a whole heck of a lot out in these first 4 weeks. I mean, maybe you can against Maryland, but these, especially the first 3 weeks, are pretty, I guess, laughable games from X's and O's standpoint. So, I mean, good tune-ups. I mean, it's obviously you can't apologize for your schedule and you can't apologize for who you play. So Michigan will, they'll play who they play, and again, I mean, it's good that at the same time, on the opposite end of the spectrum, it's good that that they're playing these type of games too, because which they can afford the opportunity to kind of get a lot of faces out there, especially, we've talked about the quarterback spot all week ad nauseum, all off season as well. So they're fortunate in that regard where they can, shuffle guys in and out a little bit and get guys a little extra snaps that might have not see the field as much during the year. So there's a lot of positives. And again, I mean, we won't have our questions answered until stuff kicks off on Saturday. So we're close. We're getting there.
Yeah, no doubt. And what comes along with scheduling, I guess an easier to navigate non-conference schedule, is that other teams have done it so many times before them that this shouldn't be an issue, right? I mean, Alabama plays Gwinnett like week 11 every year. So
yeah, right.
I just don't see an issue here at all. And I think Michigan's wise because it has really no impact on their ranking, as we've seen. I mean, there's just been too many patterns over the past few years where we've seen teams win big non-conference games and then finish 10-2 and still not get in with that non-conference. And instead of scheduling that game and going 11-1, you wonder what may have happened. And unfortunately, most of those teams are left out of the playoff, never to find out. Now, that being said, we might be heading to a 12-team playoff soon, but we'll save that conversation for another day. As far as Michigan goes, offensively, we know that the narrative is the quarterback and figuring out who the quarterback's going to be. So we'll tackle that topic towards the end of the show a bit, because I know we're going to want to have thoughts there. But in my opinion, that's something we're just, like you said, simply not going to know about or have an answer for. It's just going to be a prediction or a projection. One thing that is a sure thing for Michigan is its offensive line. It's strong, continues to be strong. But probably the most overlooked feature of the offense is the depth at the skill positions. It's just something that they've never had before under Harbaugh. I mean, they've had a lot of really good players and skilled offensive players like Peoples-Jones, like Tariq Black. I mean, I thought Jehu Chesson was an extremely good college wide receiver in his first year here, right? So, and then there's just been so many other guys in between and outside of that. But this team in particular, and this depth chart in particular, starting with Donovan Edwards, who I think is probably the most talented of any on the offense. I think he might have the best pro career of the skill players, besides maybe a Darius Clemens or maybe a Ronnie Bell if he continues to climb, or maybe one of the tight ends, right? Because we know how good those two guys are. But it's an embarrassment of riches. It's something they've never had before. And when Matt Weiss and Sharon Moore had to take over for Josh Gaddis, we knew, okay, this would probably include a pretty seamless transition, but there still should be some systematic changes, or we could expect some systematic changes. Anything you're hearing on what might be going on with Michigan's offensive system and how they might, I guess, increase the number of plays designed around the depth of their skill positions?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really heard much in particular in regards to how things are going to play out in terms of who's making the calls, who's doing what. I mean, typically in the past, you have a guy that kind of specializes in the run game, specializes in the pass game, and then it all kind of funnels up to Harbaugh ultimately at the end of the day, because you can call whoever you want, the offensive coordinator, co-offensive coordinator. I mean, this is Jim Harbaugh's team, and he's gonna be the final say in all of this. But I think obviously if you look at it, I mean, last year Matt Weiss had a big impact on this program. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that as soon as Matt Weiss shows up, Michigan has its best offensive year in years, really. I mean, that was a prolific, elite rushing offense, and then the passing game, wasn't. It was good, but it could have been better. But it improved as the season went on, and a lot of that has to do with quarterback. And again, we've plowed that ground pretty well over the past couple of weeks. So, yeah. But as far as how everything goes, I mean, I think Matt Weiss has a big say on it. I mean, he's really big on analytics, and I think he's really brought a bigger focus on analytics than maybe Michigan has done in the past. I mean, that I don't really know that for certain, but again, this is the first time that since covering the program that I've heard analytics being discussed at all. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how everything splits up. I mean, again, there's so much talent on the offensive side of the ball that it's just, you kind of can't avoid explosive plays because you've got so much talent there. In the running backs, tight ends, wide receivers, it's just there. I mean, you could almost get big plays by default almost. So, yeah, I mean, again, we'll find out Saturday how everything looks, but I mean, this program and this offense has the chance to be elite in Michigan standards. I think they can certainly revolutionize the pass game at the very least. I mean, we'll see what happens with the running backs and whether they find their gear again in the run game. But there's really no excuse considering what they have to really move the ball downfield on offense in the passing game.
Yeah, especially with Olu coming in, you just have to think that this team's built to replicate what it did last year and kind of add on to it and expound upon it. And again, that's one thing that continues to be a little contingent on the quarterback. And it's not that Cade McNamara is limited. It's just that his play style is different. And look, I mean, he very well may be limited in comparison to McCarthy. I think he is from an arm talent perspective, from what they both can do downfield. Doesn't mean that McNamara can't push it downfield. We saw the throw against to Cornelius Johnson last year. We saw the throw to Sanderstill last year in the flea flicker. We saw the flea flicker against Wisconsin. I mean, there's a lot of throws that guy made. I mean, he had a lot of big time throws against Michigan State as well. The 93-yarder to Andrell. So, the list goes on with what McNamara can do. It's just a different style for McCarthy. Therefore, I think when they're both in, you're just going to see two different styles, not different styles of offenses, not different schemes, but different calls, different designs. There's things that they can do with JJ they can't do with Cade outside of the pocket. There's routes that receivers can run with JJ that they can't run with Cade. There's routes that they can run with Cade that they may not trust with JJ because he's prone to mistakes across the middle more than not, right? So, we'll see where that goes. But what I do think is that the offensive line it's the X factor, right? And I know that it's not sexy. I know that everyone wants Michigan to be like the Bama factory, where we're talking about JJ McCarthy in the same way that they're talking about Bryce Young. But that's just not what it is. This is a team built around its offensive line and continues to be. It returns a bunch of production from last year, and they should be the focal point of the success for the offense this year on top of what they can do creatively offensively this year. So we'll shift over to defense, where there are a few more question marks, I would say, just lightly in comparison to the offense. Whereas the offense is trying to figure out which good quarterback they want to play on top of three units that are, between skill, offensive line, it doesn't get much better than what Michigan has offensively. Now on defense, they have to replace not just Aiden Hutchinson, not just David Ojabo, but also Dax Hill. So let's start over top. We'll talk safeties. That's where Michigan loses the most. Outside, they lose as much in the safety department as they lost in the edge department in terms of production, because all four starters are gone. Right. Yeah. So while the sexy statistic is all the sacks, you have to respect what Dax Hill and Brad Hawkins were able to do over top last year. I know Brad Hawkins a bit limited because he's kind of like that tweener body, a little bit too linebacker to be a safety and a bit too safety to be a linebacker, and struggled in some coverage last year and in years past. Was fantastic against the run, right, but didn't offer as much over top. Maybe R.J. Moton, Rod Moore steps in and fills in that role. I believe Rod Moore is playing Brad's spot. So, he's a guy who we probably see being better in coverage. But there's also R.J. Moton, who's a guy that could be a star, right? Has all the makings of one, has plenty of snaps on top of that. And then there's Makari Page, like the forgotten son. He had nearly starter minutes as a freshman and then fell off the face of the earth under a new regime when Mike McDonald came in last year. And then kind of worked his way back up, went the old school route, and just stuck it out and ends up in the mix as one of the three starting safeties for Michigan this year, according to Harbaugh. But with all that said, there's a lot of question marks there. Last year, Michigan had the safety position locked up. There was no question. There was no second thoughts. There was no lost sleep over the safety position. And in a college football world where passing the ball is the primary factor, and you're going against an air raid offense in week one, and you've got to face C.J. Stroud, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Marvin Harrison Jr. in a couple of months from now. Safety is important. So break down the safeties for us, Josh, and what you've been hearing throughout camp.
Yeah, I continue to hear R.J. Moton has, like you mentioned, has had a really good camp. Jim Harbaugh really likes Moton. He likes the fact that he's a multi-sport player. He's spoken a lot in the past how baseball can really help you as a safety, as far as ball tracking and the athleticism and all that kind of stuff. And I think, RJ checks a lot of those boxes in terms of what you're looking for in a safety. He has, great athleticism, has shown to be able to track down the ball and pick off a pass before, as we saw last year against Michigan State. Yeah, like you mentioned, there's plenty of depth there, but the question marks kind of, are just lingering of what this group can do. And again, I don't think we talk enough about what Dax Hill meant to that defensive back unit. He was just so good at what he did, and he's and he's going to be sorely missed by the program, but you have to move on. And a guy like Rod Moore too, who's come back and had a really solid camp. Him and RJ are right there neck and neck in terms of, safety 1 and safety 2. So I think, Michigan can do a lot worse than having both RJ and Rod Moore there returning. So, if Rod Moore continues his kind of upward rise of where he was last year, he was dealing with injuries too, pretty much not all last year, but a good majority of last year. He was dealing with some injuries. So he, after all that considered, he still had a great year. I think, if you give a healthy Rod Moore out there, I think that's really going to change the scope of everything. And Makari Page too, again, another guy that's had a really strong camp. The coaches have loved what he's brought. Just a guy that's worked hard. I mean, and good for him. I mean, he, could have easily just transferred after the year and said, I'll go find somewhere where I can play. But he got in there. He worked hard. He earned his place. I mean, it wasn't given to him by any means. I mean, he earned it, and just continued to receive praise all throughout camp. I mean, his name was constantly brought up. Just a guy who was having a solid camp, and that reflects to Harbaugh naming him safety number 3. So he's definitely going to see time. And again, these first 3-4 weeks can kind of allow you to shuffle a bunch of guys in and out, because there's plenty of other guys that we haven't mentioned. Guys like Caden Colazar, who Harbaugh is really high on. Pretty much the defensive staff in general is really high on him. Special teams stud. Keon Sabb too is kind of in the mix. I wouldn't say I think he's probably a distant fifth in that race, but I think he's had a really good camp and would probably see some time and maybe a mop-up duty. But as I said, he's probably a distant fifth compared to those other 4 guys. But again, there's talent there. It's just you got to see what it can do when the snaps are live. So a lot of our answers are going to be, a lot of our questions are going to be answered once everything snaps. But there's talent there. There's talent there at the safety spot, and Michigan is happy with what that safety group has been able to do throughout the camp. I mean, sometimes you hear kind of whispers like, "Oh, I don't know what we're gonna have," but I haven't heard anything like that. So I think that's a really good sign.
Then we shift over to cornerback, the other side of the back end of Michigan's defense, where things are far more of a sure thing for the Wolverines. I mean, a ton of experience there between Jamon Green and DJ Turner. DJ Turner's story, we've talked about it a ton, right? Middle of the year was really Michigan's CB3-4 fringe last year, and then ends up as the lockdown number 1, and then named number 6 this year on PFF's list of the top cornerbacks in college football. So he's become one of Michigan's best corners it's had in a long time, and he is positioned this year to kind of cement his legacy and go out on top. And he's fighting for draft stock. So he's a guy that's trying to vault into that first 3 rounds type of stock right now, more of like a day 3 guy at best. So he's playing for a lot. Jamon Green's opposite of him, and a guy who had to hold on to his position, hold on strong, right? Because he was surpassed last year by Turner, and now those two have to come together and work the boundaries. And then at the nickel spot, Mike Sainristil is, in my opinion, the most intriguing piece of this Michigan defense to watch in the non-conference play, because Michigan hasn't had a nickel with that much speed and that much of a motor to tackle. I mean, the tackling ability, we saw how well he could block last year as a receiver. I think that translates really well from a tackling ability for him, and just the drive to want to go do it, and the effort he puts into it, I think is going to serve him well. Obviously, he has experience. This is not his first time playing defense. It's what he played in high school. So between those 3, there's plenty of more talent outside of there. You talk about Will Johnson. I mean, he's a 5-star who anywhere – I mean, there's probably a 97% of schools in the country would take Will Johnson to start this year, I would say. Like the top percentage, maybe not, but there's a lot of schools out there who would love to have that guy at the CB3, CB2 spot, and he's hanging out in Michigan's room as a fringe 4, right? And as a boundary guy, definitely a backup, definitely a guy who will rotate in as right behind one of the gray or green. But plenty of talent in the corner room. Things are more of a sure thing at the top with a lot of potential behind them. So your thoughts on the cornerback room?
Yeah, again, another really deep room with a lot of top end experience. DJ Turner, again, last year, we're kind of in the discussion of like, all right, who's going to rise in the corner spot? Who's going to kind of fill in? And DJ Turner was that guy. And, now we're talking about who's going to fill in behind DJ Turner. So I think Jamon Green has had a really good camp. I've been told a lot of good things. Him and Will Johnson were in a very, very competitive spot for that number 2 defensive back spot. It was 1 week I was told that, Will Johnson's got it locked down. The next week I hear that Jamon Green's taking it back, and then they've flip-flopped a couple of times before ultimately Green locked it down, which I think, is a good thing for Michigan. I don't think it's a bad thing that the more experienced player won out in the end, but Johnson's going to play. He's going to see the field. Harbaugh talked about him being the best freshman out of every freshman he had in camp. So he's definitely going to see the field. And I think you're spot on about Mike Sainristil too. I mean, you think you're talking about the ultimate team guy who's, willing to do whatever it takes to make the team better. And it's, the decision to switch to cornerback was a bit of a personal decision because that's where he and his family feel as if that's where his NFL future lies, at corner. And but at the same time, it was one that that the coaches were like, hey, you want to do this? And then it was something that he ultimately wanted to do, and he picked up on it pretty well. So yeah, he's going to be an extremely intriguing guy at the nickel spot. I think a guy that could really do some damage this year as well, which would be great. I mean, getting that and having a successful Mike Sainristil will be a huge coup for that defense. So yeah, again, it's just a really busy group, a lot of top end talent. And, I'm looking to see what Jamon Green can do because, I think the second that he would perhaps struggle, I think you're going to see Will Johnson take that number 2 spot right over and see that flip flop real quick. So a lot of guys have, depth behind them nipping at their heels. So they got to be on their best game or they're going to get passed up. So I think that's the beauty about a lot of these spots on Michigan's roster is that, there's a lot of talent that's really, really close behind and one slip up or one bad set of practices or games, and you're going to get replaced on the depth chart. So cornerback is definitely one of those positions where you might see that happen.
Shift over to linebacker, and we'll quickly go through the front here. We've taken up the bulk of the time. First episode, find that rhythm. So we'll start with linebacker, and Junior Colson is the number 1 name we want to go to with linebacker when it comes to Michigan. I mean, athletically, he's freak. Physically, it's years and years ahead of where was he 20? A 20-year-old should be. And I mean, he got bigger during the offseason. His legs got noticeably bigger, and they were already like tree trunks as it was. So Colson, we'll talk about his play for sure through camp. Nakaiho Green, as we know, dealing with a little bit of a hamstring problem right now. Not sure if he'll be ready for Saturday as of what Harbaugh said a couple of days ago. So we don't know that yet. Probably a game day find out for us. Game day decision, I would assume, as well. So we'll find out when they find out, essentially. Past that, I mean, Kalel Mullings looks like he's gone from testing out the running back waters back to just kind of being a linebacker at this point, probably because of CJ Stokes' ascension along with Tabby Dunlap. I just imagine there's not much left for him there. And Michigan's a little thin over here. And then lastly, Michael Barrett. And Michael Barrett's probably like one of the, I think, equally to, maybe not equally to Sainristil, but in the same, I guess, conversation as Sainristil as one of the more intriguing pieces, because Michael Barrett was a guy who started, similar to Makari Page, with Don Brown, and then again just wasn't used nearly as much under Mike McDonald. But without Nakaiho Green potentially in week 1, Mike Barrett might get that opportunity. Jimmy Rolder is a freshman who probably won't start this year, but is a guy who, if Nakaiho Green goes down for longer than a couple of weeks, and during this non-conference setting where he doesn't have to burn his red shirt, could do a lot with an opportunity, right? Because he's physically ready. Playbook-wise, we're not sure yet. We'll see how it translates. Joey Velasquez, I mean, that's another guy who could step up and take a lot with an opportunity. Obviously, I would be biased in rooting for that as a baseball guy. But Michigan's linebacker room has a lot of, I guess, variables to it in that a lot of things could happen with Makari Hill-Green's injury. Because I think everyone's in agreement that Junior and Makari are the guys, right, at the mic
Yep.
in the week. But Michigan likes to put more than 2 guys out there at a time, as we know who that other guy is. When Makari is in, is it Barrett? Is it Kalel? Are they spelling? Are they subbing linebackers nearly as much as they do the defensive line? A lot of questions left to be answered, especially with Minter, with Jesse Minter, the new defensive coordinator, who schematically aligns with McDonald, but we don't know what his gameplay plan will look like and how, what his sub percentage will look like in comparison to Max and so many other schematic things that might be intricacies more than things you might notice right away. So we'll talk about linebackers. We'll start with Junior. I mean, we know how good he is, but we know he's young, and we know there's still some things to round out there for him, despite all the talent. Based on his camp, what do you think about Junior's season?
Yeah, I mean, based on everything that I heard from his camp, I mean, the expectation should be that he's going to have a pretty big year. I mean, I think Michigan is, the expectation for Michigan is that he's going to take the next step. I think for him the big thing is to, kind of seize this starting role, taking over the Josh Ross type of leadership that that he had and that Michigan is going to miss this year. George Hilo just met with the media this week and discussed that about the next steps that Colson should take, and him being more of a vocal leader was probably the top point of him and of Colson's game, and he said that he's coming along in the leadership, and even Colson himself has said that as well, that that's what he's focusing on, is being more of a vocal leader and kind of seizing this opportunity to take the next step. And he realizes what's at stake. I mean, he knows that a big year is not only going to help the team, but only help his draft stock as well. I mean, that's going to make him go even higher if he has another elite year. So, yeah, again, I mean, he's the linebacker spot is going to be that major, I guess, question mark out of the entire defense. Personally, I mean, yeah, you can make an argument that the defensive end position is, but I think just from a depth standpoint and what you have there, I think the linebackers are a little thin. If they get a couple more injuries outside of the Makari Hill-Green hamstring, you might be getting into a little bit of trouble there. Because I mean, you hear good things about Deuce Spurlock and Micah Pollard and Jimmy Rolder, but again, you'd rather not trot out true freshmen if they're not ready. And again, if there's a couple of injuries that sink in there, it's gonna be iffy. But hopefully, if Makari Hill-Green can't go on Saturday, he'll be available the next Saturday. I'm not expecting it to be a big long-term thing. So just hope everyone stays healthy. But yeah, to back to Colson, the Michigan expecting a big year from him, and I think he's expecting a big year from himself as well.
Certainly looks the part, no doubt about that. The defensive line has a unique, I guess, skill set in comparison to most other defensive lines, in that they have a ton of returning production despite losing 2 starters, right? So hardly and seldom do you ever see 2 defensive ends like Ojabo and Hutch on the same team, but also seldom do you ever see that they leave to go to the draft, and then the guys who fill in behind them have like a plethora of experience prior to taking over as starters. So Mike Morris is a senior. Jalen Harrell is a junior. Chris Jenkins is a junior. Mozzie Smith is a senior. Rayshawn Benny is the only really young guy kind of mixing in, and he's with Mason Graham, who's mixed in with the defensive tackles. But as far as the edge play goes, like, Mike Morris is a senior, as we said. I mean, Harrell's a senior. Taylor Upshaw is a graduate, 6th-year guy, I think, or 5th or 6th-year guy. So the edge position doesn't have Hutch or Ojabo as the pure pass rusher goes, with its returning seniors and juniors. And despite all the I guess, experience and the veteran leadership there at those spots, however, kind of solved that problem because they just happened to land Yabi Anoma, who are obviously, I'm learning how to say it, so pardon me if that's wrong. But when they took Anoma, I mean, goodness gracious, it's like replacing fire with fire, because he's got what Ojabo had. I mean, he's got what Hutch had from from a physical perspective. Like that guy is 100% built to play in the NFL. I mean, it's no secret his recruiting background. It's also no secret his background with dismissals from programs. But if Michigan can be this, I guess, renaissance for him, this final opportunity where he really erases his past and just simply cements his legacy as an extremely good football player and ends up in the NFL draft, Michigan might end up the luckiest beneficiaries of that, because the biggest thing they were missing, as we know, during camp, and I think was kind of hinted at by coaches a couple of times early in camp, was the absence of pressure from pure pass rushers and having to create pressures in creative ways because of that. So while Mike Morris and Jalen Harrell and Taylor Upshaw, and they all bring, and Julius Welshoff, they all bring a ton of experience, right? Some more than others, like Morris far more than Welshoff, sure. But either way, there's experience there. Guys who have been in the room, guys who have been in the defense for a couple of years, guys who have appeared in big games plenty of times. I mean, you think about Mike Morris against Ohio State last year, right? But they still don't have that pure pass rusher like they had two of last year. But to compensate for that, they've got Anoma. And then on top of that, the number one freaking college football, Maize Smith, in the interior, along with Chris Jenkins, who everyone's calling the mutant now, and Mason Graham, who's one of the top defensive tackle true freshmen in the country and has cracked Michigan's rotation as a starter. So a lot of moving parts there for Michigan's defensive line. How do you navigate it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. How do you navigate that? I think Yabi Anoma's addition is a low risk, high reward type of move, because, you know, if he works out, then great. Michigan got a major victory in the transfer portal. They got a huge addition that helped them through this one. I mean, he does technically have 2 years of eligibility. So, you know, if things work out this year and he decides to come back, then great. You know, but I've got the sense that if he has a big year, he's going to, you know, go to the NFL. But again, if it doesn't work out, then okay, great. You know, they move on, and so does Anoma. So there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of moving parts. I mean, again, we didn't even mention Kenneth Grant in the discussion for defensive tackles too. I mean, again, another moving part that's going to absolutely see the field. And, you know, having a Graham and Grant, you know, freshman duo. I mean, it's extremely, extremely rare where you see a defensive tackle start as a true freshman, or even really play meaningful snaps as a true freshman. I mean, your body's got to be at game ready, that level. I mean, your athleticism, your knowledge of the playbook, a lot of factors go into that. And, you know, coming in, both Graham and Grant kind of checked those boxes early of being in game shape and having that athleticism. You know, the last thing really needed to do was kind of grasp the playbook. And, you know, it's, by all accounts, it sounds like they've at least grabbed enough of a knowledge to see meaningful snaps this year. So again, if Michigan can really get the best out of Graham and Grant in this year, I think that's a major win on the recruiting trail, because I think both were under recruited guys that Michigan won. And yeah, I mean, a huge recruiting win on the trail. And how that impacts with everything with Maize Smith. I mean, you draw more attention inside, so maybe that can, you know, loosen things up for the guys outside to create more opportunity. I mean, who knows? But I think the onus is on guys like Taylor Upshaw and Mike Morris to you know, seize the opportunity and you know, create havoc in the backfield. I think bringing in Anoma, you know, not only is good for depth, but could be a good motivating factor for both of those guys to kind of, you know, take their game to a new level. So, you know, we'll ultimately see, you know, what happens. I mean, Michigan has depth at defensive end, but the experience is very limited when you go past the likes of, you know, Morris and Upshaw. And again, no, those aren't the most experienced guys on the planet either. So, you know, how that impacts everything, we'll see. But they'll have every opportunity to go and take this job. And, you know, if it ends up being a Noma, then that's even better for Michigan. I mean, you've got a guy that is game ready, you know, just had to kind of learn the playbook a little bit, but It's not like they picked him up off the street and expected him to come in right away. I mean, he's in game shape, so he's definitely going to play. So we'll see what happens there. I mean, I think I think it's natural just from what Michigan lost in Hutchinson and in Ajabo. I think it's natural that Michigan's going to drop off a little bit in terms of the pass rush and the sack numbers and tackles for loss, all that kind of stuff. I think that's natural, and I don't think that necessarily is a bad thing considering what the kind of elite year both of those guys had. But to have a guy that could rival that or at least bridge the gap would be a huge win for Michigan defensively. It'd be a huge win.
I think this year is kind of setting up perfectly for Michigan. I don't mean to jinx them, so knock on wood twice if you care about Michigan's record. But it's kind of the perfect year for them schedule-wise because they have to figure all these things out, and they have like the 3 perfect games to do it.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
I've been pumping up Maryland since March probably because I think their offense is like historic. I mean, they have 2 NFL wide receivers and an NFL quarterback, in my opinion. And I mean, Talia might not make it in the NFL as a starter, but as a college football quarterback, I mean, he's as accurate as any college football quarterback, like almost ever. I think his numbers are just absurd. And I know they're absurd in the accuracy department, but as far as like historically, like it's up there, right? So Michigan gets these first 3 games to kind of figure that out. And then they get this perfect, not trap game, but I guess you could call it a trap game in a way, but Michigan should be able to overcome Maryland's defense. I mean, Maryland's defense is terrible, but offensively, they should get a test on that defense. They should be able to find some things out about that defense that game after 3 games for the non-con and then on to Maryland. But we'll keep it here for week 1 and talk about Colorado State. Michigan is facing 2 teams, or I'm sorry, all 3 teams Michigan faces this year have a new head coach in the non-conference. UConn to Mora, Hawaii to can't even think of his name. I know it's
Chang.
Yeah, there we go. I knew it. I just didn't want to guess it and be terribly wrong. And that's just something you don't want to be wrong on. And then Jay Norvell, right, who comes over from Nevada, brings a ton with him. I think it was 27 transfers out of Colorado State, and there was a ton about the same amount who came in. I think 12 of them were from Nevada. And we'll start with the offense for Colorado State. The offensive line is completely new. 4 starters are transfers. And the 5th is a redshirt freshman who's currently battling with a redshirt senior. And you just hate that. You hate when a redshirt freshman is beating out a redshirt senior. I'm sorry, redshirt sophomore who hasn't registered a statistic yet beating out a redshirt senior. So it's just no good there. And then your other 4 starters they have experience as starting offensive linemen, but they've also never played together before. And their first time playing together is going to be in week 1 of a Michigan game at the Big House, coming off of a Big Ten championship, and everyone trying to figure out what the hell's going on with the quarterback battle. So the play is going to be rockets, right? So not a good recipe at quarterback. They have quite the I don't even know how to describe this. Quite the project there because they have a freshman from Nevada who transferred in from Nevada, whose name escapes me because I'm just terrible at names, Josh. And I was reading up on Colorado State's team website earlier today, and I read a story where the team reporter, who I know is like obviously going to be biased, he's a team writer, right? But all the same, writes for the university website and said that the swagger this freshman quarterback carries himself with it's not false, right? Like it's not a front. Like this guy actually kind of follows through on what he says, and that's just not something you expect to see from like a university website. Like I just feel like the coverage there is usually completely black and white. So for them to point out the personality means like this guy's going to have some confidence. And we'll talk about the scheme, and that's the air raid, right? And it all kind of relies on the quarterback. So if this guy has confidence, and Michigan's safeties are a little bit conjummed at first, there's going to be an opportunity for this guy to kind of like show off who he is, right? And then Jay Norvell is trying to do the same thing in his first game as the head coach. Now, where things get really interesting, in my opinion, for Colorado State is at wide receiver. I mean, they've got multiple good wide receivers. 2 of them are stars and studs. And I think the air raid could cause issues for Michigan in the early goings, especially with think about it. The questions are what? Defensive line and safety and line, like the boundaries are covered, right? But everything else is a question mark before Saturday. I know that they have talent there, but as far as how it's going to play out, like there's more questions defensively than anywhere else for this team, and to have to face an air raid offense to start might be a tough thing to counter. So, how do you think they'll handle the air raid offense?
Yeah, I mean that's the ultimate question. I think you better hope they handle it. So I think it's going to be great. I mean, it's a great test. I mean, yeah, maybe the talent differential isn't on the same playing field, but it's a great test for the young guys, for a guy like Michael Barrett, as a linebacker who's going to be running all over the field. I mean, it really plays into his strengths. I mean, he's an athletic, speedy guy, and he's going to be running all over the place. I think that's going to suit him very well. But yeah, I mean, it's the real question is, can Michigan get some significant pass rush to kind of disrupt a quarterback's rhythm? Because 9 times out of 10 they're going to be throwing the ball in the situations they're not going to be running the ball very much. So if you can disrupt a quarterback's timing and all of that stuff, I mean, you're going to have a much better time reeling him in and shutting down an air raid. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're talking about offenses that Michigan could ask for in week 1 to play against, I think an air raid one would be a really good start. I mean, it not only tests the linebackers, obviously tests the defensive backfield, and it gives your defensive line a chance to get in there and sack the quarterback and disrupt everything. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I agree. I think things might get off to a shaky start just as things kind of just develop. I think you'll see a lot of missed tackles because teams don't really tackle each other in training camp. I mean, you show good technique and good, you show good practice etiquette, but they're not tackling each other. So especially in an air raid, you want to wrap up your tackles and not let these guys run free. So I think you might see a little bit of rust in that regard. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think a really successful day is kind of limiting the opportunities. Yeah, maybe give up a little bit down low, but don't give, kind of like the Ohio State game plan, but not at the same time. I mean, don't give up the big play, but just keep the ball in front of you and obviously keep them, keep them behind the sticks. So, yeah, I mean, I think if you're talking about the best case scenario in terms of offenses you face week 1, I mean, you can't get much better than an air raid for sure.
So for this Colorado State offense, before we move on to the defense, my page would not load. I had the roster pulled up and it just exploded on me. I was stuck on Clemson trying to navigate to Colorado State while hosting this show, and it was a great attempt at a multitask, but a beautiful failure. Clay Millen is the quarterback for the Rams, and he is the young gun that's gotten the attention. He was the backup to Carson Strong in Nevada last year before transferring over and following Norvell to Colorado State, and he's a pretty well-recognized guy, well covered in high school out west, and a guy who they expect to be a star for them, and who Norvell, for the most part, has kind of built this whole rebuild around, at least offensively. And then Torrey Horton is the receiver transferring over from Nevada, and he was behind Romeo Dobbs, who is now with the Packers, and he was behind him for 2 seasons and was still able to rack up, I think it was like over 700 or 800 yards, and he had 10 touchdowns. So he's a guy who's going to be real effective for them. But the number one, at least how I see it, is Dante Wright, who's a senior who stuck it out and stuck around at Colorado State, but had these off-injured problems last year. And he might not be the number one over Horton, but he's a guy who, in limited time last year, only 8 games, had 1 multi-touchdown game where he had 2 catches for a touchdown against Wyoming, and he was still able to rack up, I think it was like over 650 yards in a limited amount of time, only 8 games. So, and with an improved quarterback play, and not to mention with a scheme that's like meant for receivers to absolutely feast with stats. Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to do that for sure. So he's a guy to look out for. The running back, Ajon Vivens, is a guy who stuck around for Colorado State. Not one of the 27 who transferred out when Norvell came in. But he's a pass catcher, and that's why I think he stuck around. I mean, it's perfect for him. He gets to be a pass blocking running back who kind of skips out into the flat and can make things happen. And then that, might cause problems for Michigan in the short yardage there. Past that, I mean, really what I think this comes down to from the offensive perspective versus Michigan's defense is the fact that this offensive line has to put up with the strength of Maize Smith, and the strength of these guys, I think, is really what's going to cause problems for Colorado State. Not only are they going to have trouble communicating, I think, having to play their first game together in a stadium and an environment as crazy as the Big House will be on Saturday, but having to do it against guys like Maize Smith and guys, I mean, if Yadi Anoma gets in there, having to fight him off if I'm a tackle is like the hardest thing on earth. There's no film on Anoma. I think that might be Michigan's like biggest. I mean, there is. It's deep in there though, because I tried finding it. So yeah, the air raid offense is not going to cause problems for Michigan from Colorado State's perspective. But like when they get to the Maryland game, I think that conversation is important. I think that's where we'll kind of see how true this safety over top hell is going to be. Because here's the thing. I mean, last year Michigan's coverage grades were great, but they also had a historic amount of pressure. And if they can't create that pressure this year, or they have to lose a nickel, like if they have to blitz a nickel to create that pressure, or blitz a linebacker to create that pressure, then that's opening up something for that quarterback to make a quick read on. And I think the air raid is going to give you the most problems there. I just don't think the personnel is there for Colorado State to really challenge them. Defensively, it's a far different story defensively for Colorado State. They only brought in 4 transfers, and they're starters. Offensively, there's 7. So we'll just do that little comparison for you. There's really only 3. I think one of these guys is going to mix in, but really only 3 true starters transferring him. And Angel King came over from Nevada. He's a really good safety and had a good career. Greg Lede came over. Chigozie Anusium is probably the most significant transfer for them. He'll be a pretty good corner. And then CJ Onyechi, the defensive end from, I believe, Rutgers, came over, and he's a guy who can get after the passer pretty well. So a lot of experience for Colorado State in the defensive line. They rotate 11 linemen. That's what defensive coordinator Freddie Banks said. And not to mention, Freddie Banks is a disciple of Michigan State defensive coordinator. Help me with the name, Josh, because I'm so bad at names.
Todd Hazelton?
Todd Hazelton, boom. So Freddie Banks is a disciple of Todd Hazelton and has a scheme that he says was built from Hazelton's scheme himself. So it's a 4-2-5 front. Michigan fans should have no problem remembering what a 4-2-5 looks like. So I think we all remember those days. So what you're going to see is a defense that is extremely turnover happy. Nevada under Jay Norvell led the conference in turnover margin last year. Meanwhile, Freddie Banks' Montana State defense, where he was the defense coordinator last year, they went to the FCS final, and they were 6th in scoring offense and I think 3rd in turnovers in the country. So these are 2 guys, Norvell and Banks, coming together with very like-minded, forefronts defensively, in that they want to create chaos, they want to create turnovers, and they want to force mistakes. And they're willing to be really aggressive doing it. And that's going to play well for Michigan. I think Michigan's got an offensive line that's going to make this impossible for Colorado State to execute. I think their skill players are going to give a tremendous amount of difficulty to those in the backfield for Colorado State. And if the offensive line is not allowing the pressure to get there for Colorado State, and either Cade or JJ has time in the pocket, those 2 are too decisive against a defense like this for it to go wrong. Not to mention JJ and Cade's ability to escape the pocket and extend plays should play well. But defensively, Colorado State, I think, they're better defensively, much better defensively than they are offensively. But Michigan's offense being as good as it is, I just don't see this playing out well for Colorado State.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's again, we can praise Colorado State all we want. I mean, we can, tell them how good they are, and they might be a pretty good defense, but I just don't think they have enough in the tank to shut down Michigan's offense. I just don't think they have enough talent. When you talk about aggression and swarming to the ball, the first thing I think about is being a defense being overly aggressive, wanting to try and make Cade or JJ make snap decisions, and then you hand the ball off to Blake Corum and he's off to the races, or you throw the ball outside to Donovan Edwards and he's streaking down the sideline. So I think this, again, I think you mentioned it really well. It's that this offense, his defense plays really well into Michigan's hands offensively. And I think they're going to be in for a couple of big time plays because, Colorado State's going to try and get too aggressive and try to shut down things that they shouldn't necessarily try to shut down. And again, Michigan's offensive line is just too good. It's too good to fall for that kind of stuff, and it's going to be it's too good to fall for what they're going to do. I mean, yeah, you can talk about one new guy in Olu Oluwatimi, but I think that chemistry problem has been solved. And, I don't think there's going to be any chemistry issues, especially between Alu and Cade and JJ and stuff. So I don't think, the Colorado State has enough to confuse Michigan's offensive line. They've been through enough as it is, last year to kind of fall for that stuff. So I would be very, very surprised if Colorado State has an effective day defensively. And that not necessarily means that effective where they win, but effective to where, Michigan won't cover the spread because they're not putting up enough points. So yeah, we'll see. But I think, again, this is really turning into a positive situation just schematically for Michigan. Best case scenario too. You see a lot of different. You're going to see a lot of different schemes, a lot of different fronts, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that really plays into Michigan's favor here as the season goes on and we get into Big Ten play.
All right, let's wrap up episode 1 with what people love most, and that is predictions. We will rapid fire these off and get you guys on out of here and ready to enjoy the weekend and get ready for Saturday. So we will start with Big Ten East and West predictions, and then follow that up with your biggest surprise for Michigan in 2022, biggest player surprise in 2022, one for offense and defense. I'll get us going. I'll start us up. I'll let you think for a sec. I think Ohio State's going to win the Big Ten East. I know that's kind of spoils like my whole season prediction that's coming up tomorrow, but yep. And then on the West side of things, I just can't pick against Wisconsin. I have a hard time doing that. I know a lot of people want me to pick like Minnesota because they're kind of a trendy team right now for a multitude of reasons that I don't understand. But it's hard to pick against Wisconsin. I mean, it's just kind of tradition there. I think that Iowa's down this year in comparison to years. So I just can't buy into the offense for Iowa. I think a lot of other teams in that in that division, are starting to surpass Iowa a little bit and how they can counter how consistent Iowa is. But the offense just can't push the needle for them. And games like last year where they beat Penn State under the lights the way that they did, like the luck percentage for Iowa had to be in an unbelievable category. The amount of luck that went their way that night was absurd. Now, that being said, Iowa does have tremendous defensive back play and could win in the division. So either way, I'm sticking with Wisconsin and Ohio State in the Big Ten title, and I'll take Ohio State to win that, go to the playoff. I know I'm just like everyone else. I am just a carbon copy. Now, the biggest surprise for Michigan football in 2022 on offense, I can't just sit here and not stick to my guns. That would be silly. I can't just back away from the thing I've been saying for 10 months. I'm going to go with Darius Clemens. I just think that guy, you just can't look at him and keep him off the field. And if Michigan decides to do that, then more power to him. There's a lot of good skill players there, right? We know that. Anywhere else in the world, I think Darius Clemens plays this year, besides Ohio State, because that core is absurd, and Alabama's core is a bit absurd. But outside of that, I can't see many other places where he doesn't play. He's probably opposite of Jordan Addison in USC if he's at Southern Cal. So I'll go with Darius Clemens as a guy who, hey, maybe it takes him a while. I don't know. Maybe it takes him week 6, week 7, but there's going to be an opportunity. I think the kid's just too good. And then defensively, the biggest surprise for Michigan in 2022, I will go with. It's hard to call a Noma surprise, so I won't take the cheap route. I will go with Derek Moore. I just think at some point he will make an impact. And I said this on the board, he's similar to Clemens in that, you can't look at him and be like, why is that guy on my sideline? It's impossible to look at him and not think about not playing him, because there's just no way. It doesn't matter where you're at, college, high school, he's a beast and a beast of a man. And then when you see him move on the field, how he can get out of his three-point stance, how he can burst through his stand-up, just the obvious strength. Now, there's a lot of questions there technique-wise. There's things he has to get better at to round out who he's going to be as a position player for Michigan in the future. But as a rusher, as a pass rusher in passing downs, I think Moore and a Noma coming off the edge is a sight that we will see at some point this season, and I think it will be successful for Michigan because those two guys are pass rushers, and that's something that they need right now. So I'll hand it over to you for your Big Ten East and West predictions, and then your surprises for Michigan.
Yeah, no, before I get started, that's a good pick for Derek Moore, and we should have brought his name up during the defensive end discussion too, because he might not be part of the depth chart right now, but there's a possibility and there's a scenario where he will be down the line. And I think he's another guy that Michigan did a really good job of recruiting and getting in last minute. But I digress. My pick for Big Ten East is going to be Michigan. I've been pretty adamant that Michigan is going to run the table this year, which might make me look like a fool at the end of the day. But again, I'm sticking to what I believe in, and I'll take the trolls and stuff if that doesn't turn out that way. But that's all right. And I think I got Wisconsin, like you. I got Wisconsin winning the West, and we'll facing Michigan in the Big Ten championship. Again, I probably, if I didn't have to pick Wisconsin, I probably would say maybe Northwestern, because it's like an every 4-year type of deal and it's an even year. So they always have one of those seasons. But again, like you mentioned, it's hard to pick against Wisconsin. And yeah, I just can't do it. And so my surprise offensive player, that one is kind of difficult because you picked mine. And I don't want to overlap. I'd say Andrell Anthony. I think he's the one that's coming to my mind first. It was pretty close between him or Cornelius Johnson. I think someone outside of Ronnie Bell is going to have a big year, and I think Andrell Anthony has got the talent, the athleticism, and the ability to be an excellent wide receiver for Michigan. And I think that will happen sooner rather than later. And I really think that, Andrell is going to carve himself out a role this year. And on the defensive side, I'm going to go Kenneth Grant. I was mildly surprised that Kenneth Grant wasn't the first name that Harbaugh mentioned in terms of a freshman, starting on the defensive line over Mason Graham. And that's not a knock on Graham. It's just, I think Grant was that good. And obviously he's the one that Harbaugh was referred to as the, gift of the gods. In terms of his athleticism, that's who he was referring to. So I think him and Mason Graham are going to be a very prolific duo in Ann Arbor for years to come. And the sooner he can get established, the better. And I think he's going to have a really good year as well.
All right. Well, with that said, we've covered it all. The intel and the inside of what to expect from Michigan's depth chart. Previewing Colorado State ahead of Saturday, on top of predicting some things around the league and providing you with some surprises on Michigan's offense and defense. And if you came here to hear about special teams, Colorado State's coverage finished 127th last year. They're historically one of the worst special teams units of all time. And Jay Norvell just hired their first special teams coordinator ever, the only assistant to ever dedicate themselves special teams in Colorado State program history is there now. Right. They brought in an Australian who's a punter, shout out Josh, who is playing in his first football game ever on Saturday. The kicker was actually extremely good last year, and the long snapper's a transfer as well as the holder. So that's your special teams preview. And with that said, that's your first episode of Hail to the Podcast. So we will hear from you guys throughout the weekend. Make sure you're on michigan.rivals.com. Perfect time to sign up and join the community and get some exclusives throughout the week, every week, all fall. And then as soon as college basketball begins, we will roll right into that with no hesitation. We'll also be covering hockey closer than anybody else, and then rolling that into baseball coverage, softball coverage, women's basketball coverage, you name it, we've got it all. Come join us at MBR. Until then, we will talk to you again at the roundtable on Monday morning for Rise to the Victors. But you can check out Dennis's show, Afternoon Live, Michigan Football Today on Friday, and post-game on Saturday. And you can join our Twitter Spaces on Saturday after the game as well. So keep in touch. Talk to you guys next week, and enjoy your weekend.